Suffering and the Wisdom of the Body. A presentation by Professor Gershom Zaitchik, Faculty of Medicine, Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Two entities control our body, mind and wisdom of the body, which I call WOB. I discussed them in another presentation and shall therefore provide only their definition. But first, let's distinguish between two kinds of definition, by myself and by the other who observes me. They are known also as first person and third person's definition. My self-definition. I am aware that I have a body. Mind includes all that I am conscious of. Bob includes all that happens in my body which I am unconscious of. Stated otherwise, mind is my consciousness, Bob is my total unconsciousness. Subconscious belongs to the mind, since I, the mind, may remember its content. Definition by the other. Mind, whatever the self tells about itself. Wob, all unconscious processes in the body and the control of these processes. The organism is extremely complex. Only a small fraction of the processes operating in our body are understood by medicine and science. Above all, medicine fails to understand how they are controlled and how WOB keeps us alive. Last century, two great scientists, Starling and Cannon, realized that even if all physiological processes in the body were understood, we still could not explain how they are controlled. This knowledge they attributed to the wisdom of the body. WOB is the property of all life. Initially it appeared in microbes and evolved since in every species on Earth. The WOB of a microbe is also part of our WOB. Suffering, my self-definition. Whatever makes me feel uncomfortable. There are two kinds of suffering, mind suffering and WOB suffering. Mind suffering arises during my interaction with the society, as I shall explain later. WOB suffering. The control of processes by WOB requires getting resources from the environment. In order to get them, WOB needs the assistance of the mind. An example. WOB controls my fluid turnover. One day I sweat, yet WOB is unaware where to get water. It sends to the mind a message of thirst, which means I lose control of the fluid balance. Get me some water. Mind directs my body to the faucet. When in need, WOB sends many kinds of messages to the mind. They are vital for our existence. Mind suffering. The other is unable to feel my suffering. He attempts to grasp it from my narrative. WOB suffering. The other can define WOB suffering from my behavior and change in my structure or composition. Suffering of a baby. A newborn is a pure wob. It is mindless. Its mind will emerge in the coming years. Soon after birth, it loses fluid and wob will send its usual messages asking for help. Since the baby is mindless, wob will outcry loudly until its mother responds. As long as the baby is mindless, mother will take over the task of its missing mind. Suffering of an amoeba. An amoeba is mindless wob. Any stimulus evokes its suffering. The other may deduce her suffering from her behavior. Two wob attributes indicate its suffering in the amoeba. Change of structure, which indicates that wob restructures processes to minimize suffering. And behavior or motion, which drives wob away from the cause of suffering. The origin of suffering. According to Darwin, life on Earth evolved from a microbe. It was the first complex entity with the wob. Complexity and metabolism are prerequisite for the emergence of a wob. Wob possesses two mechanisms for dealing with suffering. It is aware of suffering and it remembers what initiated it. Experiment. A paramecium is a small organism living in fresh water. Place it in a prolonged container with sugar water. It moves, swims, and apparently feels good. Now put a piece of salt at one end of the container. Occasionally, paramecium will approach the salt, whereupon it will swiftly move away and never return. As the salt melts, paramecium will not find any refuge. It swims swiftly and its body structure changes. Both are measured to minimize suffering. A note by the way. Please note how I discuss phenomena in nature and in our body. Every phenomenon has two interpretations: my experience and the explanation of my experience by the other. Medicine generally ignores my experience and imposes its understanding on my wob, my experience, which drove medicine to its current conceptual deadlock, which I discussed in another presentation. Evolution of life is an ongoing confrontation with suffering. In order to survive, life has to find a creative way to reduce suffering. Definition of creative change. A creative change is an unexpected change in an entity which has no explanation by the laws which we defined. Creative confrontation with suffering distinguishes life from inorganic matter. Suffering of the human. One day Wob sent to the mind a message of feeling sick, dis-ease. Mind drives the body to the clinic. Wob sends to the mind two kinds of distress or suffering signals. One, suffering that the mind knows how to handle by itself, like thirst or hunger, and suffering which it is unable to handle, like dis-ease. Generally, suffering drives us to the physician. However, the modern physician, the other, sees it otherwise. According to him, disease brings us to him and not suffering of myself. Following Descartes, medicine regards a human as a sophisticated machine with a soul. When a component is damaged, he is sick. Treatment involves the repair or even replacement of a damaged component. Pain. This sophisticated machine lacks a component which accounts for suffering. Since there is nothing to repair or exchange, physician refers the sufferer to the soul expert, the psychologist. However, recently medicine discovered a pain component which can be treated and even cured. The same philosopher who imagined the human machine with a soul said, cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. Nevertheless, the mere thinking does not guarantee his existence. He may think, yet only Wob keeps him alive. It seems better to rephrase his wisdom, I think, while Wob makes me what I am. After all, the human in coma who does not think also is, since Wob keeps him alive. Health and disease. Modern medicine defines disease as a malfunction of a component. It is not interested in phenomena that are not associated with malfunction and regards them as psychological. Generally, a psychologist lacks the knowledge or know-how how to repair malfunction. Freud, therefore, attempted to characterize psychoanalysis as a science of malfunctions. Division of labor. While the physician is a specialist in repairing malfunctions, the psychologist deals solely with the suffering of the other. Yet psychiatrists don't like this distinction and envy their somatic colleagues who deal with malfunctions. Recently, they emancipated themselves with modern scientific arguments. Modern medical sciences came up with some suffering malfunctions. Genetic is eager to discover a genetic malfunction causing suffering which may be cured. Neurophysiology claims that suffering originates in damaged neural circuits which may be repaired with medicaments. Psychosomatic medicine attempts to cure suffering by repairing the body, the soma. Prior to the modern era, suffering was only occasionally relieved, yet it was endowed with a metaphysical purpose, punishment for a sin. The Church regards suffering as a necessary way of life, which has epitomized by the crucifixion of Christ. Sometimes before that event, Buddha taught how to relieve suffering by meditation. His teaching captured many followers in the West who are dissatisfied with medicine and psychology. Freud liberated suffering from the grip of the Church. He claimed that the drives are the roots of suffering. but actually these drives are verb messages to the mind that oppose certain directives of the society and cause suffering of the self. One day, a male verb signaled to the mind, "Find me a male to love him." Mind understood the danger of this urge, ignored verb's message, and found refuge in the closet. This illustrates a confrontation between mind and verb, accompanied by suffering. Freud believed that this conflict caused paranoia. This verb-mind conflict was initiated by the societal negative attitude about homosexuality. In the postmodern era, gay love is allowed. Mind-verb conflict is resolved and paranoia cured. We ought to distinguish between two kinds of suffering. Mind suffering, initiated by societal directive which oppose verb messages, called by Freud drive. Verb suffering, which I described before. Since disease is manifested by suffering, we might as well distinguish between two kinds of disease. Mind disease, initiated by mind suffering, and verb disease, defined by medicine as organic or somatic disease. I shall therefore distinguish between mind cancer and verb cancer. Mind cancer. A healthy woman returns from mammography with a minuscule tumor in her breast, diagnosed as cancer. Instantly, she confronts death, which is conjured by the society. Her suffering is mind disease or mind cancer, initiated by an evil societal metaphor. Prior to mammography, she was healthy, since verb did not send any message of disease to the mind. Her mind cancer was caused by the diagnosis. If society would relinquish the use of its dreadful cancer metaphor, like it has done with gay love, mind cancer would disappear and cured. And Susan Sontag described this evil metaphor in her book. Physicians ignore mind cancer and refer the woman to the psychologist. Such a horror does not follow a diagnosis of diabetes, since society takes it casually. The cure of mind diabetes is therefore much easier. I am attempting to promote a politically correct discourse about cancer. A woman does not get cancer. She meets it. And after meeting it, she is not sick. She starts mobilizing her healing and processes and recuperates. And I call her a recuperee. In the same way, every disease is actually two diseases. Yet the physician ignores mind disease and refers the patient to a soul expert. Cancer treatment is accompanied by immense suffering, which is usually ignored. Medicine regards it as an integral and natural part of the treatment, which cannot be avoided. which is false. It is possible to provide any cancer treatment without inducing suffering. Unfortunately, medicine ignores this possibility. Psychology is preoccupied with mind diseases and ignores WOB. She deals mainly with mind conflicts initiated by societal directive and norms. WOB signals are collectively known as Freudian id. The task of a psychologist is to restrain id as society demands. Yet id represents also messages by WOB to keep us alive. Id resides in the mind and is rooted also in WOB. Psychology is unaware of these roots which we inherited from the animal realm and fails to grasp their contribution to our well-being. Instead of restraining id, psychology ought to mitigate these conflicts so as to meet some WOB vital demands. Jung widened the realm of id to include archetypes, yet failed to realize that archetypes are also rooted in WOB, which is evident from studies of animal behavior. This study is done by ethology, which studies animal behavior like courtship, which affects also human courtship. Animal behavior is a WOB manifestation of the human and animal other. Belladonna, WOB of a female lover, widens her pupils in order to seduce her lover. One day, in the past, mind discovered a herb whose infusion widened pupils and called it pretty woman, belladonna. The love potion is still used by lovers all over the world. Psychology, which is not interested in ethology, lacks any explanation of such phenomena. The smile of a baby. A mother smiles to her baby and it responds with a smile. Did you realize its mystery? First, the baby has to appreciate her smile as pleasing. In order to respond with a smile, it has to know which muscles to activate. Remember, the child is mindless, and its smile was a WOB smile which it brought about when the baby was born. Some psychologists believe that the baby's smile was erotic, hiding its intent to murder its father sometime in the future. The WOB of a puppy wags its tail and so smiles to its mother. Yet it will never attempt to murder its father. Castration complex was conceived by a genius unaware of the smile of a puppy. Yet some psychologists continue to propagate this mind disease in our society. Freud's follower expanded the psychological realm and eliminated some of his unpleasant metaphors. Nevertheless, they ignore WOB, and here are some examples. Positive psychology believes that a positive attitude of the mind is sufficient to eliminate suffering. Behavioral psychology is aware of the role of total unconscious in our behavior, yet ignores WOB. Cognitive psychology studies solely the mind. Biopsychology searches our nature in genes and neural circuits, while WOB is more than that. Likewise, all other psychological schools are preoccupied with the mind and ignore WOB. We carry in our WOB a wisdom that evolved in all life entities. This wisdom enabled life to live peacefully in a hostile environment. The time has come for medicine to turn its attention to WOB. Its knowledge provides a key for grasping the organism as a whole. You might have noticed that I was preoccupied with WOB and derogated somewhat our mind. In this presentation, mind served as WOB servant. Nevertheless, I do not ignore that nature endowed us with the most advanced mind which created our precious culture. The philosopher Hans Jonas taught that nature endowed us with our precious mind in order to protect it and its inhabitants. Thank you.